Today I want to talk about my current favorite all-around hunting boot. And I'll go right off and say it. It is currently the Hanwag Alverstone. Now it used to be the Crispi Briksdal. This is the older model of Briksdal. And I'll talk a bit about the differences between these two boots. I'm primarily going to talk about this boot in particular. But first I'm going to talk about why I prefer a stiffer boot for most applications. Now, in my opinion, you don't need to be hiking steep, gnarly Alaskan peaks to require a stiffer boot. I like to look at terrain on a smaller scale, so sometimes, you look across the horizon and it's all flat, but there's a lot of washes and dips and ditches that you're going to be crossing that are actually going to end up with your foot on a 45 or steeper angle a lot of the time. Especially when you're stalking on animals and you're trying to stay low in those ditches, you're going to be walking on a side hill for a long time, even though it seems flat. So definitely keep that in mind when choosing a boot for your terrain, and because of that, I almost always go for a stiffer boot. Another benefit to a stiffer boot is when you're walking on grassy terrain, especially if it's wet, you got a big wet grassy hill, you want to be able to really kick your foot and make yourself a little step every time so you're not slipping. Whereas something softer that's going to make your foot conform to the angle of the hill, that's going to be no good. You're going to slide down or wear yourself out. You also get more ankle support typically on a stiffer boot. I appreciate that. Now really the only time when I don't prefer a stiffer boot is if I know I'm going to be walking a lot of roads or compacted surfaces. In that case, I'll go for a sneaker or a softer boot. It's going to be quieter, it's going to be lighter, and it's going to flex with your foot a lot better. You'll just be more comfortable. Aside from that, from what I've found in Western hunting, I'm almost always thankful that I have that stiffness to keep my foot and ankle right where I want it to be. Now I'll go out on a bit of a limb here and say I'm not a fan of a mid-stiffness boot. So I was using the Crispi Guide for a while, and it was a great boot. It was waterproof, it was comfortable, but I found that I either wanted something stiffer like the Briksdal or something softer and lighter like the Crispi Laponia. The middle of the road wasn't really for me. It was a little heavy. It didn't have as much stiffness as I wanted, but it also wasn't quite as quiet and light as I wanted in a lighter boot. So in my opinion, I either like to be on the stiffer end or on the softer end, not in the middle. Now, like I said, the old Crispi Briksdal used to be my go-to. I really loved this boot, and it was definitely the boot that I would gravitate to for any hunt until I got the Hanwag Alverstone. Now these are a little lighter. They're about 3 or 4 ounces lighter, but they feel a lot lighter on my feet. They're very similar to the Briksdal. As you can see, they're both a more narrow, medium to high stiffness boot. They have about the same amount of flex, even though these are well worn. These are maybe a little stiffer, but very comparable. Comparable in weight, comparable in feel. I just found that the Alverstone fit my foot a little bit better than the Briksdal did. Now keep in mind, this isn't an apples to apples comparison. It's not really designed to be. We're very proud to sell both of these brands of boots, and they have a lot of great offerings. The key here is to find a boot that fits your foot. And that leads me into talking about these boots individually, and the most important thing when looking for a boot that I really have to stress is find one that fits your foot. Even if you have a low quality boot that fits your foot well and that's comfortable for you, you're going to like that a lot better than a $1,000 pair of boots that just don't quite do the trick. Now that being said, my foot is about average width, I would say. I have a medium to low arch, and then I have a fairly pronounced heel, so I need something with a little more of a heel cup. I find that I get blisters if the boot has a fairly straight heel cup. This boot, as you can see, cups nicely. It's fairly narrow, and on the inside it doesn't have a ton of arch. I will mention I use the factory insoles on these boots. I haven't had any need to change them. If you have a higher arch, consider finding an insole that works for you and trying that insole with different boots. Now I could ramble on all day about personal fitment, but instead I want to talk about this boot, some of the things that I've learned to love about it, and what I'm going to look for in the future when looking to purchase another pair of boots. Now to start from the bottom, these insoles, the tread pattern especially, I've really appreciated. It's got more of a bar on some of the high wear areas, so you don't grind those down too quick. But then the tread itself is aggressive, good spacing, it dumps mud well. There's a good arch here and enough of a heel to make a good brake when you're moving downhill. The actual height of the sole and the midsole is low enough to where your foot is stable. You don't feel like you're walking on stilts, but then they added enough lift in the heel. It's actually called heel drop, but the heel is high enough to where your foot has a little bit of an aggressive stance like that. That helps a lot when you're going uphill, but they didn't do it too high, so these boots are still comfortable on flat ground. The stiffness has been perfect for me. It has enough flex to where you're not getting blisters. You feel like the boot fits to your foot, but you're also not fatiguing your foot when walking on uneven surfaces. And you can definitely get a good edge with this boot or a good toe edge, and you don't feel like you're doing all of the work with your foot. Now, one more thing that I appreciate about the design of the bottom end of this boot is the angled in heel. I really feel like that allows me to cut into the dirt when I'm walking and almost kick out a shelf versus something that goes straight up or out. It's going to be more of a rolling motion. You're going to have to put a lot more pressure. This feels almost like a knife blade, like you're grabbing the side of the hill. Another boot that does that really well is the Kenetrek Mountain Extreme. And then the last thing I'll cover on the bottom end is the narrowness of the sole, specifically in the arch. So here and here is going to be the main support areas of your foot. The fact that that's where the contact is and there's no contact in the arch allows you to make that cut into the side hill without rolling your ankle to conform to the hill. So that definitely increases the agile feel of the boot, and it really works well on those tricky side hills when you're trying to kick out an actual shelf for your foot on every step. Moving on to the rest of the boot, I have no complaints with the actual padding under my foot. The rubber band around the toe and the heel seem to be holding up very well. No glue is coming undone. And then this leather here, it's soft enough to where you don't get those creases that will pinch your foot. I will say this leather does absorb a bit of water. So if you're looking for a boot for wetter conditions, consider something like the Kenetrek Mountain Extreme or the new Lacrosse Ursa MS boot. That Lacrosse boot is legit in wet conditions. That is the most waterproof hiking boot I've ever worn. Moving on, I feel like the heel cup has held my heel in place well. There's no heel lift, which is when your heel moves up and down, gives you a blister. The ankle support is definitely adequate, and the breathability has been pretty good for this caliber of boot. The synthetic material in here seems to do a good job. The last two things I want to cover are the lacing system and then the top collar of the boot. Now, as for the laces, they've got no eye loops here. It's just a small little metal ring. The reason for that is where your boot flexes. So you don't want too much going on there. It'll pinch your toes. Here and here, they've got ball bearings, which allow you to bring those laces tighter to your foot. And here they have this locking mechanism that keeps your laces in place all day. Now, my complaint there is that after a little dust, a little dirt, and especially some ice, I find a hard time getting that undone. You're supposed to pull both sides, and it really is pretty stiff. So not a huge fan of that. I normally leave them unlocked and it works fine. Moving up, you've got a good heel lock here, 3 rings there, and your tongue lock. So pretty standard, but I definitely feel like my foot stays secure because of the lacing. I personally don't have to miss any rings or do any fancy lacing with these boots, whereas on these boots I did. Now the last thing I want to cover is the collar, or the top of the boot. I'm not quite sure what they call that, but I've had boots that have too stiff of a collar and it'll really hold your Achilles when you're trying to go downhill. It'll over time really wear on you and create a terrible pinching feeling. And then I've had boots that dip too low to where you don't feel like you have any ankle support. You feel like this is all just flopping around. The Alverstone definitely hit it right in the middle. There's plenty of flex to this, and there's no tight spot, I guess. It's evenly distributed, but it's also not too loose, so you still feel like you have ankle support. Overall, this is a very lightweight and capable boot, It fits my foot really nicely, and I've put a couple hundred miles on it. It's held up well. I can honestly say that this is my current go-to if I could only choose one boot. If you're in the market for a new pair of boots, head over to gearful.com or give us a call for some exclusive offers. As always, like the video, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments what boots you've been wearing and what you like. Thanks for watching.